Okay, so I'm going to give a few thoughts on the current situation in the UK. So we have a hung parliament, which means none of the political parties in the UK could achieve enough seats in the House of Commons to achieve a majority. So if there was a vote on some important issue, the leading party would not be able to guarantee that it would be able to push the bill through, which is a problem. So in the case of a hung parliament, what's likely to happen is the Conservative Party, which still has the largest number of seats, will attempt to form a minority government, which are notoriously fragile. Certainly this is the most fragile would-be government I've ever seen in my lifetime, so this is going to be quite interesting. So the Conservatives, to try and help themselves form this majority, they're going to form some kind of confidence and supply agreement, sort of off-the-cuff agreement with the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, the DUP. So this won't be a formal deal with the DUP, but it will be sort of an informal agreement, a quid pro quo type situation. And when you include the DUP, and assuming that the DUP votes with the Conservative Party, there's now an effective majority of 8, which is still really small, but it is at least a majority, so things can get done. Now, the opposition is currently the centre-left party, the Labour Party, led by the quite hard-left opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn. His party did better than expected in the election. They have about 250 seats. Now, given the fragility of the would-be minority government, I sort of thought, is there any possibility that Corbyn could become Prime Minister, at least before 2022, which is when we would normally expect the next election? And I have to say that even though I don't think it's likely to happen, it's still a possibility. There are a number of situations that could cause the current, well, would-be government, I'm not even sure we technically have a government yet because the Queen's speech hasn't gone through, the Queen's speech being the bills that goes through at the start of the term, and the first thing the government does is push these bills through and the government's formed. If the Queen's speech doesn't go through, of course, Jeremy Corbyn will get a chance to form a government of his own, so that's one possibility. I'm going to lead on from that and discuss a variety of situations that could potentially lead to a situation where Jeremy Corbyn does become Prime Minister. So the first one, like I've said, is the Queen's speech failing to get through. And the only situation that would happen is if some deal falls through between the Conservatives and the DUP. Historically, the DUP vote against the government. I mean, the government has been a Conservative government for the last 7 years. The DUP have voted against the Queen's speech for the last 7 years, which is not surprising because they are on the opposition benches. It's sort of a natural thing to do. It's not strictly necessary for the DUP to vote for the Queen's speech. They just have to not vote against it, essentially. So the first possibility is that the DUP cannot come to a deal with the Conservative Party, and that seems to be possible because there's this whole situation where the Democratic Unionist Party, the sort of nationalist party, the nationalist unionist party of Northern Ireland, so they care about the national interest of Northern Ireland, but they also care about Northern Ireland as part of the UK. They're a loyalist, they're a unionist party. One of the main things that Northern Ireland is interested in is a payout from the central UK government to Northern Ireland. Apparently they're looking for, I think it's a £2 billion payout. Now, the Conservatives will probably not want to go along with this because there's a whole background in Northern Ireland of a situation called the Troubles, where there used to be these sort of two sides in an ongoing conflict in Northern Ireland, the Republicans and the Loyalists. And as part of the resolution of the Troubles, there was an agreement called the Good Friday Agreement, which meant that there can't be any the national government can't be seen to be showing either side, either the Loyalists or the Republicans, that is the people that want a unified Ireland, any favourability. So if it was seen that the government was accepting bribes from the Loyalist Democratic Unionist Party, that would be seen by everyone as a conflict of interest and a potential violation of the Good Friday Agreement. So obviously the Conservatives don't really want to do that. So this is why the talks seem to have come to a halt, because the DUP seem to want this bailout. They seem to want this 2 billion, and the Conservatives don't want to give it to them because it would show a conflict of interest. And there's actually a court case that's ongoing about any form of deal at all being against this Good Friday Agreement. Now, the results of the court case will be interesting, and I have no idea what the court will rule in favour of. But I think the situation would be quite odd if a confidence and supply deal between the UK government and the DUP is prohibited, because the DUP can't be prevented from voting in Parliament. They are entitled to have MPs in Westminster. So if there's an informal deal, I don't really see how any court ruling can stop them from voting in favour of in the same direction that the Conservatives vote. What I do think a court ruling would prevent would be any kind of formal coalition, which there won't be anyway. So I find it difficult to see how practically there can be a ruling against a sort of confidence and supply deal between the DUP and the Conservatives, because that would also seem to prevent the DUP from freely being able to offer their vote anyway. What they might say is that it has to be done in a way that doesn't show any conflict of interest, but that seems also impossible, because any kind of informal agreement will be seen as a conflict of interest. So the whole situation seems sort of, we've reached some kind of impasse here. I don't really see how this can be resolved easily. So this is one possibility, that the whole DUP Conservative agreement falls through. That doesn't necessarily mean the Conservative government will collapse, because the DUP could still abstain, but it does put them in a very, very weak position. So that's one possibility. If the DUP do choose to vote against the Conservatives against the Queen's speech, then at that point Jeremy Corbyn would get an opportunity to form a government of his own, which he will fail in doing because the numbers simply do not add up. I mean, we can imagine some kind of rainbow agreement between the Labour Party and all the other left-wing minor parties, which you can get sort of just under the amount of seats that you need. But they would, even the Labour Party would still need some kind of deal with the DUP, which is even less likely than a Conservative deal with the DUP. In fact, the DUP have flatly refused to even consider any kind of deal with the Labour Party. So it would be even less likely that a Labour minority government would succeed. But if we got into that situation where the Queen's speech is voted down and then we try to form a minority Labour government and then that fails, which it probably will, then we would be in a situation where there's going to be another general election. And in the case of another general election, it's likely that Labour could, well, I'm not going to make a prediction this time, but they could win it, and then we would end up with a majority Labour government. So that's definitely one way that could happen. Let's say that the Queen's speech gets through. Now, in that case, the government could still collapse. So there could be a vote of no confidence, which is, again, it's essentially another vote in Parliament where the majority of MPs lacks confidence in the government and triggers a general election. This is possible, but highly unlikely, because, again, it would require the DUP to vote with the other parties. So again, it all hinges on the sort of deal that we get between these two parties. If that doesn't happen, then it would require some of the Conservative backbenchers to vote against the government, which would be political suicide. I can't imagine any situation where that would happen. They're essentially throwing their own careers down the drain by doing that. and calling another general election where their seats might also be vulnerable. So I can't see that happening. But if the DUP don't play ball and vote down the government, in a no confidence vote, they must understand that by doing that, it's probable that we would end up with a Labour government, at least if we go by what the polls are saying, and we can't dismiss that. So I think it's more likely that in the case of a no confidence vote, the DUP would either vote with the government or they would abstain. And if they abstained, then we would need around 4 or so Conservative MPs to vote against the government. There are a lot of hard Remainers in the Conservative Party that do not like Brexit at all. I suppose there's always the possibility that some of them could vote on that basis, but again, it would be political suicide to do that. You can, I mean, when you're an MP and you're a backbencher, you can rebel a certain number of times before you face things like deselection, which basically means that you lose your seat in the next election. The Conservative Party removes you. Now, I mean, I would have thought voting against the government in a no confidence agreement would be pretty damning for anyone that did that. It's not something I can see happening. So there's the no confidence agreement. Then there's of course the possibility that the government itself can call for a general election, and that's exactly what happened a few months ago. I think this is one of the less likely scenarios for Labour to end up in power, because they surely must have learnt their lesson that you can't. If we have another general election now, people at this point will be voting Labour just to stop there from being a third general election. It's getting that ridiculous. Like since 2011, let's count how many national votes there are. 2011, there was the national referendum on the alternative voting system. Then we had the European elections of 2014. Then we had a general election in 2015. Then we had the Brexit referendum in 2016. Then in 2017 we have another general election. So that's since 2010. That's 5 national votes. And that's not even that's not even considering all the. Oh, of course, there's the Scotland one as well. I mean, that was a regional vote, but there's 5 national votes and a bunch of regional ones as well. Are we really going to have another general election in 2017 or 2018? Well, the Conservatives certainly won't want one. Labour might, because they want to take advantage of their current poll ratings, just like the Conservatives want to take advantage of their current poll ratings. You know, I think this could go in an unpredictable way. I won't rule anything out if we did have another general election. So the way it seems to me is that the most likely scenario for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister would be something along these lines. The DUP deal with the Conservative Party falls through because there's complaints about a conflict of interest. So the DUP abstain on important issues. And then we have a situation where the majority, if the DUP abstain, the government still has an effective majority, but it falls to about 3 or 4. With the DUP backing them, it's about 8. If they're abstaining, it's about 3 or 4. At this point, we're in a very dangerous situation where even if we can't assume that even naturally, even if nothing goes wrong, that the Conservatives can last until 2022. So in the last 5 years, there were 24 by-elections. So a by-election happens when an MP resigns or dies or can otherwise no longer be an MP. Maybe they're facing criminal charges. There are a whole bunch of reasons why there could be a by-election. A by-election basically means a single seat is called for an election. Now, so there's been 24 by-elections. Of those 24 by-elections, the Conservatives lost seats in about 4 of them. So now, given that without the DUP support, assuming that they're not directly going against the government, we're talking about a majority of literally 2 or 3, and the Conservatives lost 4 by-elections in the last 5 years, you can see that we could end up in a situation where the Conservatives just lose their majority through by-elections. And of course, the last 5 years they were arguably in a better position than they were now. So there's every possibility that their slender majority could just vanish because of these by-elections that may occur in Conservative marginal seats. But then one might argue that because MPs are fully aware of the nature of the situation, they might be less inclined to resign. I mean, MPs resign for various reasons, but I'm not sure if it'll change the situation. Maybe it'll make it more likely because they're just fed up of the government being as sort of incapable as it currently is. Anyway, what we can say with some certainty is that the current situation is extremely fragile for the government, for the Conservative Party indeed as well. It would be if the government was ever going to fall, then it could happen during this term. So this is a situation that is going to be unpredictable. I don't think Corbyn is likely to become Prime Minister just because he can't form a minority government either. His possibility is even less viable. There would have to be another general election, and so you have to weigh these possibilities up. So the series of events to create a Corbyn as Prime Minister would be: one, the government would have to collapse in some way, which would maybe involve the deal with the DUP going south. Secondly, there'd have to be a general election. And then thirdly, Labour would have to win that general election. And I know that the polls are looking good at the moment, but again, this cannot be taken for granted, that they have to gain more than 60 seats. And of course, it's going to get harder and harder to do that. This is not going to be easy to predict. I mean, imagine if we have another general election and end up with yet another hung parliament. Perhaps it's a hung parliament that results in a Labour minority government this time, with perhaps the support of the SNP. I mean, imagine how much of a crap show that would be. We would have a situation where Labour, who wants to leave the EU, who wants to leave the single market, at least that's what they said in their manifesto, who wants to keep the Trident, and who wants to keep the UK together, is in an alliance with a party that wants to break up the UK, that wants to get rid of Trident, that wants to reverse Brexit. I mean, this is an even more unstable alliance than the one between the Conservatives and the DUP. And don't let's forget that the Labour Party can't be controlled easily by Corbyn. I mean, Corbyn was the most rebellious MP in his party. So what would his 3-line whip, his ability to control his party is questionable even now. I mean, what was to stop an MP from saying, why should I follow your lead when you were the most rebellious backbencher that the party has ever seen? It would be hypocrisy. So we have this backbencher that is now the leader of the opposition. It's a completely unprecedented, this habitual backbencher that is now potentially going to be a prime minister. It's quite, anyway. So I guess the UK political situation is very turbulent at the moment. I mean, there's also another problem that the Conservative. I mean, I was talking about Labour struggling to control its MPs. I mean, the Conservatives have that same problem. I mean, we've got a situation now where the Conservatives are sort of coming with this effective majority by the skin of their teeth, are holding on by Conservative gains in Scotland, which is remarkable. Now, the Scottish leader of the Conservatives is a woman called Ruth Davidson, who ran quite a liberal, positive campaign that was clearly very successful in Scotland. I mean, they gained 13 seats, which is Scotland. Scotland's a very, very left-wing place. It's totally bizarre that they would make such strong gains here. Now, Ruth Davidson has a lot of respect now. I mean, she's the only prolific figure in the Conservative Party at the moment that has a positive polling rating. So there's always the possibility that she could try and make her Conservative wing in Scotland slightly more independent of the overall Conservative Party. And then that would cause difficulties because her wing of the Conservative Party is surely going to be against any kind of hard Brexit. So this is going to make things even harder. But let's not forget also that even though there's a lot of Brexit opposition in the Conservative Party, there are also die-hard, potentially UKIP flirters in the Conservative Party as well that will not take anything other than a hard Brexit. So Theresa May is in this situation where she's been pulled both ways. Ultimately, I'm thinking that this might come down to time. I mean, we've already wasted the last 6 months of negotiations and absolutely nothing has happened. So I'm sat here wondering what happens if the timer runs out and nothing has happened in that time. Do we get this automatic hard Brexit? There could be this bizarre irony where the left-wing opposition to Brexit actually ends up causing an automatic hard Brexit because the timer runs out in March 2019. Basically, the situation in the UK at the moment is a massive madhouse, and I don't think any predictions are going to be wise at the moment because anything's going to be proven wrong. So if you're an American and you think your politics is turbulent at the moment as well, it's pretty turbulent here as well, but it should be interesting anyway. So those are my late night thoughts. I hope you enjoyed.